So what is a dashboard? Well, to quote 𝘆cie_'{'} a dashboard is a visual display of the most important information needed to achieve one or more objectives, consolidated and arranged on a single screen so the information can be monitored at a glance. And here I've got a screenshot of the dashboard I'm going to teach you in this mini course. Okay, here's the dirty secret. Actually, it's not really that dirty. A lot of people think that there's some kind of black magic or another program or add-in required to build dashboards in Excel, but that's not the case. You can build Excel dashboards simply using the built-in tools. And that means you may already have the Excel skills required to build an interactive dashboard in Excel. I'll cover what these skills are shortly. You see, Excel dashboards are simply a compilation of charts and tables in a one-page report. There's no add-ins required or special software. All you need is Excel, a bunch of data, and of course the skills. You can build dynamic interactive dashboards without any VBA. Sure, you can use VBA if you want to, but most of my dashboards don't use VBA at all. So at the end of this, you'll know how to create your own interactive Excel dashboards. But first we have a little bit more theory. So just as you wouldn't build a house without a plan, the same applies to building your dashboards. We need to know the purpose of the dashboard. Find out the underlying reason for the dashboard request. Is there some hunch about business performance that management might want to prove or disprove? We need to know the audience so we can pitch it at the right level. There's no point presenting a complex chart if the audience won't know how to read it. What are the KPIs we should be measuring? What time period should the report cover? Where's the data coming from and how often can we get an update? How often should the report be updated and how will it be delivered? And lastly, do a mock-up of your dashboard on paper before you dive into Excel. Time spent here will save you hours of redesign later. So the Excel skills that you need. Well, it probably goes without saying, but charting skills are a must-have. Excel tables aren't mandatory, but if you want to be able to quickly build dashboards that are robust and dynamic and easy to update, then tables will be a huge asset. Are we using tables in the dashboard I built in this course? Formulas? Well, I don't think there's ever a time where formulas won't be needed. Obviously, the more formula skills you have, the better, but dashboards can be built with some fairly standard formulas. Functions like if, VLOOKUP, index, match, to name a few. Pivot tables, now these aren't mandatory either, so if you're more comfortable with formulas, then that's okay too. On the other hand, if you're more familiar with pivot tables, then you're ready to build dashboards right now. In fact, the dashboard I'm going to show you today relies almost exclusively on pivot tables for the analysis, and that's because they're super quick to put together. Formatting, well, here you mostly need restraint as opposed to knowing all the formatting tricks available in Excel. And lastly, you don't need any VBA skills to build dashboards. In my online dashboard course, I show you a few cool tricks using VBA, but I give you the code so it's easy for anyone to use, even if you don't have any VBA knowledge. But by no means is VBA a prerequisite to building dashboards. And I won't be using any VBA to build the dashboard in this course. So let's look at design. Well, design can make the difference between conveying your message quickly and easily and hiding it in a sea of formatting and chart junk like these donut charts and gauges. This dashboard looks pretty, but it's cluttered with overuse of formatting and bad chart choices. Dashboards like this might give the reader an initial wow because it looks so pretty, but once they realize it's taking them a long time to glean any information, they'll soon get bored with it. When it comes to dashboard design, less is more. That is, less colors, less fonts, and less formatting. Stay well away from 3D effects, gradient fills, shadows, and any other unnecessary formatting. You see, what we don't want to do is hide the valuable information with too much formatting noise. Instead, we want to use color and formatting to draw attention to key points and show relationships between the data. For example, if you have two charts displaying the same metric but in a different context, then you might color them the same to show the reader that they are related, just like I've done in this dashboard with the bar charts at the bottom here. Both use the same color because they both display visitor numbers, just grouped differently. Charts are a useful tool in communicating messages through a picture. That is, the shape of the data contains a pattern, trend, or exception. But knowing which chart to use for your data and the message is essential. Bar charts are ideal for comparing values across categories since the long category names are easier to read when the axis is vertical. The bars allow you to easily compare values. Line charts are ideal for displaying the pattern of measures over time. Histograms show the distribution of data grouped into bins or intervals. And detecting relationships between two separate values can be done with a scatter chart, like I've done here with ice cream sales versus temperature. As the temperature goes up, so too do the ice cream sales. Let's look at where the data for your dashboard can come from. And the answer is almost anywhere. It can be in Excel or an external database like Access. It might be a text file or a SQL database, and even the web. You can bring the data into Excel or link directly to an external data source. Now for your ideal data format, and that's a tabular format like I have here. It's simply where your data is arranged in columns with a unique entry on each row, and preferably without any blank rows or cells. And the reason this is ideal is because all of the powerful tools and functions in Excel are designed to work with tabular data. If your data isn't in this format, then you're going to run into problems. For example, you won't be able to use pivot tables or many of the built-in functions the way they were intended. Instead, you'll end up having to use overly complicated formulas, and this could mean a slow model that's prone to errors. Now, if you're not sure what a tabular format is, then later on when you download this presentation, you can click the link for the tutorial. Now, I also recommend formatting your tabular data in an Excel table, which I'll show you in this webinar. The benefits of Excel tables are that your dashboards will be quick to build and very easy to update. If you're not familiar with Excel tables, then at the end, when you download this PowerPoint presentation, you can click on the link. Now, I'll go out on a limb here and say that using Excel tables might be the best productivity tip you'll ever learn. Okay, that's enough theory for now. Righto, here we are in Excel. I'm on my raw data tab, and what we're looking at here is my raw data that we're going to use in the dashboard I'm going to be building today. And it consists of some Google Analytics data from a test website on traffic and visitor information. And there's 12 months worth of data. If we look at the end, I've got 10,000 rows of data. So the important things to notice with this data is, firstly, it's in a tabular format. I've formatted my dates as true dates or Excel serial numbers, so that when I analyze these dates in my pivot tables, it will interpret them as a date, and I'll be able to use the grouping tools, which I'll show you in a little while. Now, the first thing I want to do is format this data in an Excel table, and to do that, press Ctrl+T. Excel will detect the range of my data, and it also thinks that my data has headers, which it does, so let's check this box, and that's really important for pivot tables. You must have headers in your first row. So I'm going to click OK, and we can see that it's put in some nice formatting for us. And the other thing to note is that it's created a named range called Table 1. I can change that name if I want to. I've also got this Table Tools tab opened up where I can change the design. I'm not going to go into tables in detail, but if you aren't familiar with Excel tables, then they should be the top of your list of things to learn because they're very powerful, and you'll see why as we work through this. Now, if I press Control End, I'll go to the end of my table, and you can see there's this tiny blue icon, and that indicates the end of my table range. The other thing that I want to show you is that, as I said, this is a named range. So if I go to the Formula tab and open the Name Manager, you can see I've got a name in here called Table 1, and it refers to the range A2 to L10001. Okay, I've also got a sheet in my file called Dashboard, and on there I have just some formatting left over from when I was testing this dashboard. And what I want to point out is this is just a regular sheet. There's nothing special in here. It's not a special sheet called dashboard or anything like that. It's just a regular sheet. I've renamed it and called it dashboard. And if we look at the first thing I need to do is create my analysis. Normally I'd have another sheet in this file for analysis, but I don't need to do that just yet because my pivot table will insert that for me. So with any cell selected in my table, I can click on the pivot table icon. It detects my range, and notice how it's called table 1. That's because this table has a name called table 1, and I'm going to insert it on a new worksheet. Now the first thing I want to do is rename this sheet, and I'll call it headline pivots, because these are the pivot tables that will be feeding my headline figures up here. Now I'm actually going to have a few pivot tables on this one sheet. Normally I wouldn't recommend that because as a pivot table grows, it can't overlap another pivot table. And so if you were to refresh your pivot tables and they needed to grow and overlap one another, they wouldn't refresh properly and your report would be incorrect. So I'm going to break that rule here, but that's because this is just a demonstration. So the first thing I want is my date. Now I want to group my dates into months, and it's automatically selected months by default, and I'll click OK. Now if your dates aren't formatted correctly, you can't use this grouping tool and you'll get an error, so you'll know. And that's what I was talking about here, where I said I fixed these dates so they're in the correct format for the purpose of grouping here. Alright, the next thing I need is my visit count, my sum of visitors, and my bouncers. So this information is information about the traffic to our website. So the sum of visitors, this is how many times people have visited our website. The visit count is the unique number of visitors to the website. So the fact that there is 10,000 visits but 20,000 visitors indicates that some people came back more than once, on average twice. The bouncers, this is where a person comes to your website, they visit one page and then they leave the site altogether. The objective generally with websites is to engage your visitor. So you want them to view more than one page. So if they're bouncing, if they're leaving after seeing just one page, then that's an indication of how engaging your website is. And so that's why it's an important metric. So the next thing we want to do is work out what the bounce rate is. And for that, we're going to insert a calculated field. And we'll call it bounce rate. Oh, if I could spell, bounce rate. In our formula, what we want is the bouncers divided by the visitors. So I'll click add and OK. And that's automatically put in for me. The next thing I want to do is just format that field so that the number format is a percentage, and I'll just leave it at no decimal places. Okay, so now we've got the information for our headline figures, we can go ahead and populate our dashboard. So our total visits is this figure here, and you can see Excel has automatically put in the get pivot data function, and that's great because as our pivot table grows, it will always pick up this grand total figure because it's saying it's going to pick up the sum of visitors on the pivot table that's on the headline pivots sheet, headline pivots, and that begins in cell A3. Okay, so we'll do our unique visitors, and that's this 10,000 figure. Now you notice I've put in a plus at the beginning of my formula, and that was just me being lazy. You don't have to start your formulas with an equal sign. If you do use a plus, then Excel will put the equals in for you, and I think that's a legacy feature coming over from Lotus 123. So I'll do this one properly. So total bounces is this figure here, and then my bounce rate is my percentage. Okay, so they're my headline figures. So you can see that all I've done to start building my dashboard is insert some formulas that reference my analysis in here. Now one more thing I should put in here is a label for this pivot table, just so that I know where these figures are used. in my dashboard. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is build some pivot tables for my charts that I'm going to put in here. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is copy this pivot table and paste it just beside. Now remember, I don't recommend you put multiple pivot tables on the same sheet, because if this were to grow in a horizontal fashion, it could overlap this pivot table and then it will cause you problems. But I know in this case my data is only ever going to grow vertically. As I add more data, I will have more rows of data in my pivot table. Okay, so the other reason to copy a pivot table is because when you use slicers, if you want one slicer to control multiple pivot tables, then every pivot table you want that slicer to control must share the same pivot cache. And the easiest way to ensure they all use the same pivot cache is to copy and paste them. Okay, now I just need to edit this pivot table. And for that, I only want my visit count and visitors. So I'm going to remove my bounce information. And then I can go ahead and insert a pivot chart. And we'll use a line chart because we're plotting data over time. So line charts are great for that purpose. They show the trend of data over time. I'm going to tidy up this chart a little bit. I'm going to hide all the filled buttons on the chart. We'll make it in keeping with our theme, our colors, and I'll delete the legend. Now, what I'm going to do is move this chart to my dashboard sheet. So Control X to cut, go to my dashboard, Control V to paste it in. And I'm just going to move it into place roughly, and I'll resize it a little, grab the corner, and as I resize it, I'm holding down the Alt key, and that snaps it to the grid. So you can see this chart is perfectly aligned to the cells underneath. Now, I actually want to move it up a little bit, so I'm going to hold down Control while I click the outer edge, and now I can use my arrow keys to move it into place a little bit better. Okay, let's tidy it up a little bit more. I'm going to delete the grid lines. I want to format these lines. I don't want the markers, so I just double click on it. Now, that works in Excel 2010 to open the Format Data Series dialog box. In Excel 2007, you have to right click and then choose Format Data Series. So let's fix our marker. We'll turn it off, and while we're there, we'll select the next line and we'll do the same. No markers. Okay, and close that. All right, now we can go ahead and build the charts for this other section. So we'll go back to our headline pivots, and I'll copy this pivot table because it's already got my bounce information in that I want to keep, as opposed to copying this one, which doesn't. So now I'm going to pull out my visit count and visitors, and then I'm going to copy it one more time. I'm going to paste it right beside. With this next chart, it's actually two charts. So I need two separate pivot tables for my bounce information. So in my first one, I'm going to pull out my bounce rate, and in this one, I'm going to pull out my bounces. Okay, so now I've just got two small pivot tables ready to use for my pivot charts for the bounce information. So let's go ahead and create a pivot chart. And I'll do another line chart, change the formatting, get rid of that legend. I'm also going to get rid of my header, get rid of my fill buttons. I can do lots of formatting, doesn't matter where you format it. Now I'm going to Control X, go back here, Control V to paste it in, hold down Alt while I move it into place. Now I'm just going to close that because I don't need it anymore. Now the other thing I want to do is, because I've actually got two very small charts here, the first one for my bounces goes at the top. So let's get rid of those markers, none. And the other thing I want to do is I want to move these axis labels to the top, because these two charts are going to share the axis labels. Because they follow, because they have the same axis labels, I don't need to repeat them twice. It's just adding more clutter to my dashboard, which is already a cramped space. So let's format my axis. And I want no tick mark, and I want my labels high, and that will move them to the top. So I'll click close. Right, let's go ahead and insert the next pivot chart. And all you have to do is select the pivot table you want to insert a pivot chart for, and then pivot chart. Again, it will be a line chart. Get rid of the legend and the heading and the lines. and I'll fix the color of that in a moment. So I'm going to hide the fill buttons, Control X, Control V. Okay, let's move this into place. And we're going to have to make it quite a lot smaller now. I'm holding down Alt while I resize it, and then Control to select the outer edge, which then lets me use my arrow keys. The next thing I want to do is I need to change this line color. I want to maintain the theme of my dashboard. I don't want to go too mad with my colors, but I also want to be careful to not use the same color for two different types of data. So this is my bounce rate. So I want to choose an orange color, and I want to choose one that's different to any that we've used before. And I think I'll use that dark orange. Okay, so this one is a bit similar to this one. We might change that as well. And notice I'm just on the pivot chart tools in the Format tab, and I'm choosing Shape Outline, which might seem a bit strange because it's a line, but that's the one you choose as opposed to Shape Fill. All right, let's see, what have we got? Too pale, we haven't got a lot of choice. We'll use this orange here. There we go. Okay, so now I have my two charts in. I can get rid of this axis. I don't want to delete it. I'm just going to hide it. Format. So I want no tick marks and no labels. And click Close. So now what we need to do is probably move this over a little just to align it with the chart above. That way the points on this line will match the points on this line, and we'll be able to share that axis. Now the reason I've created two separate charts here is because the scale for this is between 0 and 1, or 0% and 100%, and the scale for this is more like between 0 and 2000. If I were to put this line in this chart, it would literally be a flat line along the bottom there. You wouldn't be able to see it at all. And so one option is to plot this line on the secondary axis, but actually I prefer to plot it in its own chart, because when you start adding a secondary axis, it can sometimes be confusing to know which axis relates to which line, and so it just slows down the interpretation of the chart, and I just find that this is much clearer. Okay, one more thing I want to do is actually hide these axis lines. And because they're hard to select now, I'm going to go up to the Format, and then in here I can choose my horizontal axis, and then I can right click Format Axis, and with the line I don't want to see the line at all, so I'll close that. And I'll do the same for this one. Let's see, I can also arrow through the different elements in my chart to select them. Right click, Format Axis, and line, no line. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is put in a legend. Remember that I deleted my legend initially, and that's because I haven't got a lot of room on my chart itself. So what we're going to do is make a manual legend, and we'll use the shapes to do that. So I'll just choose this straight line. Now I'm going to draw the line, but while I draw it, I'll hold down Shift, and that will just force the line to go completely straight, and I don't need a very long line, so that will do. I'm going to change the color to match these colors in my chart. So that one will be for my unique visitors. And let's just make the weight of this line a bit fatter. Okay, and I'll drag it down into place, and then I can just use my arrow keys. Okay, so that's my unique visitors. Now I've got my line and I've formatted it a bit thicker than the default. I can hold down Control, you can see the little plus sign appears, and then I can drag it. While I'm dragging, I'm going to click Shift as well so that I can't get it in the wrong place, and let go. Now it's a little bit wide, so I might make it a bit narrower, so let's make it 0.6. Okay, right, now all I need to do is change the color to match my chart. Let's make this one a bit narrower as well, 0.6. Okay, and I'll just use my arrow keys to move it. Now I'm going to copy it and repeat. Total bounces, that is my yellowy colored line, or light orange, and then my bounce rate is my brown color. Okay, so now I've made a legend using the shapes on the Insert tab, and that's just saved me some precious real estate in my dashboard. And the next thing I want to do is just format these charts a bit nicer. And the other thing, before I do that, I've got to turn these grid lines off, they're driving me nuts. Okay, now it's a bit clearer. Let's see, we'll move this down a little. And this one. Okay, now I'll make this one a little bit bigger. Actually, yeah, I'll make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay, I'm just manually shifting it about. You can, if you want to, format it using the tools. And if you go up to the Format tab, I can change the height and size of it if I want to be really precise. Now, I'm going to tone down the border on these charts. So I'm going to choose Shape Outline, and then I'll just use these slightly paler greys. And as you go through them, you'll see a preview in the chart, so you can figure out what color you want. Okay, now I've done one, I'm going to select the next one and press F4 and F4 again, and that just applies it to all of my charts. So I've chosen my formatting once, and then all I had to do was press the F4 key. So let's do the same for the font. Well, I don't want it red. Let's go with a grey. Same for my vertical axis, and that one, and that one. So you can see the F4 key is your secret weapon in making formatting fast. Okay, so our dashboard's starting to come together. I've toned down the headings and labels on my charts so that my lines are the most important information. I've used colours that are in keeping with my theme. I've chosen these oranges and browns because that's the color scheme for Google Analytics. I've linked this data to my headline pivot. So you can see that these charts are just regular charts in a regular sheet. And I've just arranged them in a way that it's easy to see them on one page. Let's go down here. We've got to start filling out our top 10 tables. So we're going to look at the top 10 country sources and the top 10 traffic sources, meaning the websites, the top 10 websites that send traffic to our dummy website that we're using. Okay, so I'll go to my raw data and we'll insert a pivot table. It picks up the same table name, and we're going to put it on a new worksheet. This will be my country pivots, and this will be my top 10 country sources. Okay. So the first thing I need is my countries, then I need my visitors, and actually I want my visitors in twice. I'm going to drag it down again, and this second column of visitors, I want that to be my percentage of the grand total. So this is going to show what percentage these visitors are of the total. Now the next thing I want to do is sort them from largest to smallest, because this is my top 10. So now I can use this data in my dashboard. So all I'm going to do is link to my country pivots, click on that first one there in my pivot table. Now notice how it doesn't use the get pivot data function when I've linked to the row labels, and that's because the get pivot data function only works with the values area, which are these two sum columns. So I'll enter that in there. Now I want to copy that down, and I want to do it another 9 times. So just watch up in this name box here. As I select a row or cells, it tells me I've selected 2 rows by 1 column wide. So I use that to keep a tally on how many rows I've selected. It's just a quick way for me to keep track. Okay, Control V to paste that in. Now I want my sources, so we'll go back to our pivot. And when I now link on the values area, I get my get pivot data function. And what it's telling me is it's going to return the sum of the visitors for the pivot table on the country pivot sheet, for the pivot table starting in cell A3. It's going to look at the country, United States. So this function is always going to return the sum of the visitors for the United States. So I'll press enter. Now, one of the reasons I think people hate get pivot data is if you copy that down now, and I'll just do it the slow way, you get the same result for every cell. And that's because this country field is hard keyed. So all I need to do is override that and refer to my value in B18, and now when I copy this down, it will automatically update, because now this formula says return the sum of the visitors for the pivot table on the country pivot sheet for the country India, so on and so forth. So that's one way to automate or make the get pivot data function more dynamic. All right, and we're going to do the same for the percentage of total. All I need to do is override this hard keyed field and link to that cell there, and then copy it down. Now the next thing we want to do is create what's known as an in-cell chart, and we're going to use the repeat formula for this. And what we're going to do is, well, what repeat does is it repeats a type of text or a piece of text a number of times, as you can see there by the syntax, and the piece of text is the pipe symbol, which on my keyboard is above the enter key. It might be slightly different on your keyboard, and in fact on my keyboard it's shown as 2 vertical dashes, but when you use it, it appears as 1. So I'm going to start with the double quotes because I'm entering text, so I have to surround it with double quotes. Then the pipe symbol, close my double quotes. Now the number of times is this many times, but if I repeated the pipe symbol nearly 5,000 times, I would end up with a very, very long line. So what I'm going to do is kind of normalize it, or calculate what this is in relation to all the other values. So I'm going to do that by dividing it by the maximum value in this range. F4 to absolute those. So now I'm going to repeat this value 4,984 times divided by the maximum in this column, which will be 4,984, which will give me 1. Well, I want more than 1, so actually I want to then multiply it by 100. So 100 is going to be my longest line. Now you can see it looks a bit crazy, and the trick to the repeat function, or using it for this purpose, is to use a special font called Playbill. Now you should have Playbill, and the other thing is just play around with the size. My font size is 11. So now when I double click to copy that down, I get a load of mini bar charts in each cell. And what that allows me to do is compare each value in relation to the other values in the range. And it's much quicker for me to be able to look at these bars and see that actually these values are very similar. I haven't had to read each of these individual values to quickly identify that they're all pretty much the same. And I can see that this one is more than double anything else. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is put in some spark lines, and I can see I've got some formatting in there from when I did it before, so I'll just clear them and start afresh. In order to insert my spark lines, I need to create a new pivot table. So I'll go to my country pivots, and I'm going to copy this pivot table and paste it beside. Actually, I'm just going to move it up 1 row. Okay, so what I want for this pivot table is I don't need this sum of visitors. I want these visitors, but I want to see them by month because I want the spark line to show me the trend. Now, if you have Excel 2007, you won't be able to use spark lines. So what I want to do is put my dates going across the columns. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to filter these for the top 10. Now, this filter, you can either do top or bottom. I want top 10 items, and I want it based on the sum of visitors. So I'll click OK. Now, I don't need my grand total at all, so I'm going to remove my grand total, and likewise there, remove grand total. So this is the data that's going to be displayed in my spark lines. So I'll go back to my dashboard. I'm going to select all of the cells that I want my spark lines to be contained in, and that will just help group them all together. And then insert line, and then my data range will be my country pivots, and it's just the values. It's not the labels for the rows, it's just the values. And you can see the location range are the cells that I originally selected. So there I have my spark lines automatically inserted. The next thing I want to do is just make them more in keeping with my dashboard theme. So I'll use that orange, and I might put a marker on just to make the points stand out a bit more. So now for my top 10 country sources, I can see how the values compare to one another, and I can see how each of these rows trends over time. Okay, all we need to do now is rinse and repeat for the top 10 traffic sources. So the simplest way to do that is to copy this sheet. So I'm going to hold down Control and then click and drag to make a copy. You can see there's a little plus in the sheet symbol. I'll rename that source pivots. Okay, top 10 sources. All right, now we have to rebuild these pivot tables. So let's put our field list back on. So we don't need country, we need source. And notice how I remove country before selecting source. If I put country in as well as source, it would have overlapped this pivot table here. So now I need to resort this data, largest to smallest. And I'm going to actually remove this pivot table altogether because I want to copy this and start again. And the reason for that is because I've done my sorting again on this. And if I'd reworked the country pivots sheet, pivot table, I could have ended up with some sorting issues. So it's safer to copy this one and then rework it. So I'll drag that out, put my date in, and let's filter the top 10. Now, I don't have to filter for the top 10, but what I like to do is remove all the data I don't need. So by filtering for the top 10, when I select this for my spark lines, I can see visually what I need to select. I could have done it for this as well. I could have selected top 10. I didn't. I'm just showing you another technique. It's just an opportunity to teach you something new as well. So let's go and insert the data here. So we've already created our pivot tables. I'm going to link to my sources and then do the same for this one and the same for this one. Now let's remove this and make it dynamic. So it links to that cell there, and the same for this one. Let's get rid of what's in there. Notice it's a cell reference, it doesn't need double quotes. Okay, let's copy that down. And using my name box, I can see I've selected 9 rows, or I could have just looked there, whichever's easiest. All right, let's insert our repeat function. Now notice how the font's already formatted as playbill, so it's going to be harder to see. And it's that divided by the max of that range. Press F4 to absolute the range, times 100, close my repeat function. Okay, copy down. Okay, so there's my in-cell bar charts. It's not quite as effective as this one because we're dealing with a massive number compared to much smaller numbers. Okay, let's put our spark lines in, insert line. We're going to go to our source pivots, select the values that are there, and click OK. Let's make it more in keeping. And I'm choosing the same color as here because it's the same data. It's still traffic, it's still visitors to our site. And so I can use the same color. Okay, so our dashboard is coming together. If I just minimize my ribbon, we can see more of it. But one of the great things about a dashboard is not only that you can see everything at a glance, but that you can also interact with your data. And at the moment, we can't interact with this. It's static. What we see is what we get. So let's insert some slices that allow us to choose different time periods that we might like to view. So go to any pivot table, and then on the Insert tab, Slicer. Now, if you have Excel 2007, you won't have slicers either. And then we're going to choose date because it's the month that we want the slicer for, and click OK. Now I'm just going to cut that, Control X, and I'm going to go to my dashboard and paste it in. Let's drag it up into place and we'll format it a little bit. Okay, so for my slicer, I've got this new slicer tools and options. And the first thing I want to do is give it 12 columns, 1 for each month. And I'm going to resize it. You just grab the outside handles and pop it in up there. Okay, let's change the color so it's more in keeping with our dashboard theme. The other thing I want to do is I would like to just make that slightly smaller. Okay, let's right click the slicer and go into slicer settings. I'm going to uncheck visually in, actually I'm going to uncheck show items deleted, and show items with no data lost is fine, and click OK. Alright, so now I have my months. At the moment though, this slicer isn't linked to, or it's only linked to one of my pivot tables. So let's right click the slicer, pivot table connections, and here we can choose which pivot tables we want this slicer to control. And basically every pivot table in this file I want to control, or to be controlled by the slicer. So now I can select a range of dates, and you can see that my dashboard automatically updates. I can select one, I can click and drag to select multiple, even the other way, and I can hold down Control and click non-contiguous ones, although probably not appropriate for this particular dashboard. So now I've got one slicer, and I can click the red X to clear all the filters. That allows the user to interact with the dashboard, and they're controlling everything. Everything they see is connected to this slicer. So you can see slicers are a really intuitive and slick way to interact with your dashboards, and makes it easy for those who perhaps aren't used to pivot tables. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is to make my heading a little bit more dynamic as well, because if I'm able to select, say, just Jan to June, I'd like my heading to update to say this dashboard is showing Jan to June data. So let's create a little bit of dynamic text. So we'll just pop it on our first page here. So the first cell I want in my label will be the first month, which will always be in cell A4. And then I'm going to concatenate some other text to that month. And we use the ampersand sign to join text, and whatever text we put in must be in double quotes unless it's text already in a cell like the Jan text is. And then we'll use offset to find the last row in our pivot table, which contains our last month. So the first reference point is A4. I'm not going to go into detail on offset. It's quite a complicated function to get your head around. Once you do, you'll see it's really powerful, and I do have a tutorial on my blog for offset, so go and check it out if you're not familiar with it. Right, so I'm going to use count R to count the number of rows for my next argument for offset. Now I'm just going to select more rows than are in my pivot table, and that just allows for future growth. So I'll count R, and then I need to minus, oops, actually I need -2 there, and then I'm not using any columns. Okay, right, so now our piece of text here simply says Jan to June. I can join that to this, oops, this text here. So I'm going to use a formula for that. Oops. Right, I'll put a space on the end, and I'm going to link and choose this cell here. So now my heading is dynamic. As I select different months, this automatically updates in line with the selections that I've made in my slicer. I've created an interactive dashboard, and you'll see I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. Now I don't recommend you use the zoom keys for the purpose of building your dashboard and then making it fit on one screen, because notice down here that this in-cell chart is now overlapping, and that's because Excel has trouble rendering some images as you zoom, and particularly charts can start to look a bit doolally if you use the zoom. So always create your dashboards for them to be viewed at 100%. But I'm just going to zoom out so that I can talk to you a bit more about it. So we've created a dynamic and interactive dashboard. We've not gone mad with colors, we've kept to a theme, but we're not using every color in the palette. We're also not using any 3D effects, we're not using lots and lots of different fonts. What we want with our dashboard is for the data to speak for itself. We don't want a load of noise and clutter getting in the way of the user interpreting that dashboard. The other thing you'll see that I've done is I've got down here my source and who's created it, and that's because if you're sending this dashboard out, then people may have questions for you, so it's always great to put your name on it. Also, if people are going to be printing this dashboard, then it's a nice touch to set your print range so that they can just press the print button. Don't make people work any harder than they need to interpret your dashboard. So let's go back to 100%. That's better. Last thing I want to show you. I've built this dashboard based on a whole year's worth of data, but in reality, that usually doesn't happen. Usually you're getting data every month. So let's just look at what happens if I get rid of my July data. We'll just scroll down to July, and I'm going to cut this data out, and I'm going to just pop it on a new sheet for the time being. Now the other thing I want to do is resize my table, because at the moment it still thinks there's 10,000 rows of data. So on my table tools, I'm going to resize my table, 5399, and now my table, you can see it there. There's my little blue icon that indicates the end of the table range. It's resized. So let's go back to our dashboard. I've got on my quick access toolbar this refresh all button. You'll find it on the data tab, refresh all. If I click that, it refreshes every table, every pivot table in my Excel workbook. So everything in this dashboard is now updated. The data that you see here is Jan to June. You can also see that these slicer buttons are grayed out to indicate that there's no data for those months. So now all I can do is interact with Jan to June. If I select July, I get a load of errors. Now there's a word of warning. What you should do is build in some error proofing, and you can use the if error function to do that. I haven't done that here, but that's something to bear in mind. Anyway, let's go back. We'll select Jan to June. Let's pretend it's in August now, and we just received our July data. Let me just widen that so I can see where July ends. Select July, and then I'm going to cut it out. Let's just pretend it's early August, just had a file come through with your July data. You've copied it, you paste it on the very next row in your table. Now if I go to my end of my table, the little blue icon is at the bottom of my data. My table has dynamically resized to include all this new data, and I can double check that in the name manager. We can see our table there, and it's now included the row up to the row 6239. So I've copied and pasted. Now all I need to do is click my refresh all button. My July slicer button is now active, and I can choose it, and my dashboard is updated. So in copy, paste and refresh, I've updated my entire dashboard for the whole month. Let's fast forward. Let's get the data for the rest of the year. Cut it out, go to the very next row. If you were to paste it on 6241, row 6241, the table wouldn't expand. You must put it on the very next row. Control V, go to the end. There's my magic blue icon. Shows me that the end of my table is there. Go to my dashboard, refresh all, choose my range. My whole dashboard has updated. So if your dashboards are taking you hours, days, God forbid weeks to update every month or however often you do it, then the secret is to put your data in a table, to link your pivot tables to that table, and to link your dashboard to those pivot tables. Now, I've used pivot tables here to do my analysis. If you're not familiar with pivot tables, then that's okay. You could use formulas and dynamic named ranges with your formulas to achieve the same results. So you'd still put your data in an Excel table, and then you'd link your formulas to this table so that as your table grew, your formula ranges automatically grow, and as a result, your dashboard also updates.